The protests against Boris Yeltsin and his radical economic reforms grow ever louder. So far, he's been able to hold off political challenges to his rule. But for how long?
It's the biggest mistake of any government when they lose the support of population.
Now, the nationalist chaos outside Russia's borders is being harnessed by Yeltsin's conservative opponents.
The bomb.
If we don't stop this time bomb, it will blow up not only the Russian Federation and the former Soviet Union, but the whole world.
Russia's nightmare. That's our story tonight.
Live from Canberra, the ABC's Lateline. Here's Kerry O'Brien.
Welcome to the program. Today is Lenin's birthday, which invites some obvious speculation on what he'd be thinking now about the disintegration of his old socialist empire and the desperate machinations of today's Russian leader, Boris Yeltsin, to survive. There is no doubt that Russia and its former partners in the old Soviet Union are in a highly dangerous position, somewhat equivalent to the years prior to Lenin's revolution. Over the past 2 weeks, Yeltsin has made heavy weather of a series of tempestuous confrontations in the Russian parliament. The discontent in Russia grows daily as Yeltsin's attempt to reform a terminal socialist economy into a relatively free market staggers on through increasingly rough seas. His latest unpopular measure was to increase the price of petrol by 500%. Then, of course, there are the growing headaches of ethnic conflict within and between the newly autonomous republics. Tonight we talk to a key Yeltsin advisor in this crisis, Galina Starovoitova, and to one of his most outspoken parliamentary opponents, Mikhail Astasiev. But first, this background report from our Moscow correspondent, Deborah Snow.
They turned out in their thousands at the weekend, Russia's pro-reform forces staging one of their biggest mass actions since last August's coup. They were there to support their idol, Boris Yeltsin, and to demand the resignation of the powerful Congress of People's Deputies, which had spent most of the last fortnight trying to emasculate the Yeltsin reforms. Congress resign, they chanted, demanding a referendum to entrench the president's power. But while Yeltsin still rides high in the Moscow opinion polls, many fear a national referendum could be a risky undertaking. While these few thousand hardy souls have turned out in support of Yeltsin, the question is whether they represent anything like a majority. With economic reforms hitting hard, many are worrying that the patience of whole sections of the population is running out. On a mild spring morning, you might just mistake Moscow for any other thriving metropolis. Along the Arbat, the main tourist drag, foreigners haggle over the price of Boris or Gorby. Locals investigate the flea markets springing up on Moscow's main streets. But take a closer look and see the symptoms of a society in crisis. At the Arbat, the ruble, hit by hyperinflation, is spurned for the American dollar. At the flea market, most traders are simple householders, peddling the most paltry of items, trying to supplement meagre salaries of less than $10 a month. That's well below a living wage since prices have soared. Yeltsin's economic shock therapy is hurting in other ways. Production is plummeting on the land and in the factories. Insolvency is rampant among enterprises. Health and transport workers threaten a wave of strikes. For the first time in decades, the spectre of mass unemployment looms.
They do such things that our population don't want to support these reforms anymore. It's the biggest mistake of any government when they lose the support of population.
The tranquil elegance of the Kremlin Grand Palace seemed an unlikely setting for a political showdown. But it was clearly brewing as the 1,000 members of the Congress flocked here on April the 6th. These deputies were elected more than 2 years ago, when there still was a Soviet Union. It was their first meeting since the Yeltsin price rises in January. So here in the halls where Lenin's portrait still hangs, Yeltsin had to expect a fight. But no one anticipated the theatrics that were to follow. The burly president narrowly survived the first test, an attempted vote of no confidence. But as the week wore on, Congress flexed its muscle, muzzling the reforms and threatening to strip Yeltsin of his right to appoint ministers. Only when the chief architect of reform, Igor Gaidar, announced the entire cabinet was submitting its resignation, did Congress relent. Frantic negotiations produced a vote in favour of the thrust of reform, but left open the question of how long Yeltsin would be left to run the government with his existing powers intact. The vote on the economy was a vital win, but the whole saga hardly an unparalleled triumph for the government.
No, I don't think that one can speak about a victory of only one side. I think that it is a reflection of the fact that the potential of social patience among our population is already exhausted, and we are quite close to a real explosion, and certain social concessions are necessary.
Still in fractious mood, the Congress went on to vote against measures which would free up the sale of land. Yeltsin's biggest task now is to stop the forces of reaction from both left and right making gains in popular support. Besides the economy, the chaos now sweeping many former Soviet republics is also ripe for exploitation. When former Soviet republics formed the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, late last year, they proclaimed the dawn of a new era. Instead, it's opened a seeming Pandora's box of old enmities and grievances. The bloodiest has been in Nagorno-Karabakh. Muslim Azeris and Christian Armenians are locked in murderous combat over this mountain enclave, which sits entirely inside Azerbaijan, but is mainly populated by Armenians. The full panoply of modern warfare has been deployed, with horrific consequences for civilians and militia. Russia's foreign minister has warned of catastrophe if the fighting continues, yet the CIS has been powerless to stop this undeclared war between two of its members. In the independent Republic of Moldova, events have been hurtling down a similar path. These are Russian-speaking separatists trying to break free of Moldovan rule. The former Soviet 14th Army stationed here has been threatening to come to their aid against Moldovan militia. And back in Moscow, the nationalists are also urging armed intervention to come to the aid of their countrymen.
If the government is not willing to use force to protect its citizens where there is no other way to protect them, people will lose all faith in the existing state structures.
But most worrying for the West is the ongoing war of words between the two biggest CIS members, Russia and Ukraine. At stake is control of the Black Sea Fleet and also the future of the Crimea and its port of Sevastopol, where the fleet is based. The region was given to Ukraine by Moscow's communist bosses in 1954 in an inter-party deal. Now Russian nationalists want it back and the fleet kept in Russian hands.
1954 was the year of a criminal act against Russia when one of its best territories was given away.
But Ukrainian President Leonid Kravchuk has warned of bloodshed if the Crimean question is reopened. As Russian refugees flee former Soviet republics where they're no longer welcome, it's all powerful ammunition for the new nationalists in Moscow.
And it will be maybe...
Vladimir Lukin, Yeltsin's ambassador to Washington, believes the seeds for a backlash have already been sown.
I am sure that the Soviet Union was dismantled too rapidly, too inaccurately, too undelicately. I am afraid that the rapid decision to produce the so-called independent states will produce the backlash reaction, not because of desire of President Yeltsin, of the parliament and so on, but because the people all over the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union territory, will be tired with all this mess.
As for the Conservatives, they harbour no doubts.
If we don't stop this time bomb, it will blow up not only the Russian Federation and the former Soviet Union, but the whole world.
Apocalyptic may be, but few are complacent about the future.
That report from ABC correspondent Deborah Snow. And now to our two guests. Galina Starovoitova is a member of President Yeltsin's inner circle, his advisor on inter-ethnic affairs. She's also a member of the Russian parliament, where she's been embroiled in some stormy debate over Russian minorities in republics like the Ukraine and Moldova over the past 2 weeks. Tonight she joins us from New York, where she's on a brief visit for the Yeltsin government. And in Moscow, Mikhail Astasiev, chairman of the Constitutional Democratic Party in the Russian parliament. He's a leading voice of conservatism and is on a collision course with the Yeltsin camp over the pace of economic reform and on how to handle the explosive ethnic disputes. Welcome to both of you to the program tonight. Mikhail Astasiev,
Welcome.
Just 2 months ago, you told this program that Boris Yeltsin could be thrown out of office within a few months. How safe is he now as leader after the last 2 weeks of the parliament?
When I spoke last time about few months, I suppose that 2 is not only few. Few months may mean half a year. And I suppose the position of President Yeltsin is not very easy now after the Congress, because opposition in Congress was enough powerful. I suppose you can saw that.
Do you believe that his position now is weaker?
It's enough to go to streets of Moscow and to see Muscovites near Kremlin. We saw some hundreds of Muscovites supporting Yeltsin on the Red Square with the help of militia. They go there, and the opposition was not allowed to go to Red Square. But oppositional forces stood near Hotel Russia, and it was some thousands.
And yet Yeltsin told you and others in the parliament yesterday that his reform program was unstoppable and that the parliament must stop dominating the government. What do you intend to do in response to that? Do you accept that that program is unstoppable?
I suppose simply life would stop that program, because the program is destructive. If we face the high level of unemployment, the fall of industrial production, the life would stop that program. But it's better for a country, for government itself, change this destructive course.
And how would that happen?
I suppose they must change their priorities to leave aside monetary policy and think more about production level and unemployment. And just one example, sorry. Yesterday, the price of petrol was 500% higher than before. But in the opening of the Congress, the Vice Premier Yegor Gaidar promised not to do it until the June. You see the promises of government and the real life.
There has been a lot of speculation leading up to and during this period in the parliament that Boris Yeltsin would use his presidential powers to dissolve the parliament and rule by decree. Do you feel that that was ever a possibility, and is that still a possibility?
You know, as we have a constitution that looks like American, imagine what happened in America if a president would dissolve Congress. Juridically, it's just the same situation as in our country, because if president would dissolve parliament, that would mean only coup. And of course, when somebody performs a coup, he must think twice about consequences. Remember the situation in Argentina or in Greece. Sometimes the organizers of a coup end their days in jail.
Do you feel, though, that if the president was moved to adopt extreme measures to keep his reform program going, to continue to rule the country, do you believe that he would have the support, enough support from the military to do that?
That depends, of course, on the real course of program. If the program would be supported by a population, what for to perform a coup? But if the program of policy is against the interest of people, then you need to support from military forces. But I I'm not aware that military should support such a situation.
But you've said that, that Yeltsin's supporters, you've likened them to Bolsheviks, to neo-Stalinists even. What do you mean by that?
I may show you only one example. Just now I have the second opportunity to speak to Australian people, but I am not permitted to speak to my own population because we have a political censorship. It's only one example. Imagine, we have a government television, but on that television program only people who support the government have opportunity to deliver their views. I suppose it resembles me the days of Stalin.
Galina Starovoitova, when Boris Yeltsin says that his reform program is unstoppable, how far do you think he will go to implement his economic program?
I think first of all, the supporting and the personal rating of Mr. Yeltsin remains still very high, and we know it from the data of sociological polls. And I cannot agree with Mr. Astafyev that the reforms have not the supporting from the side of population. It is not so. And I think presidency, this institute, is now the main locomotive which can promote the reforms further. I hope he will stay on his office, and I hope we cannot now change the system of ruling of the country, because the Congress of People's Deputy, which was elected 2 years ago in another conditions, in fact during the priority ruling of the totalitarian regime, it cannot rule the country 4 years further, and the majority of these deputies, more than 80%, were communists, and I think majority of them still remain the communists, even despite they join sometimes into another parties with brilliant titles.
But President Yeltsin's position is somewhat less stable, is it not, after these last 2 weeks in the Parliament? Certainly he survived it, but that no-confidence vote was very close, and there was even one occasion when he wasn't allowed to speak in his own Parliament as President.
Yes, the Congress was very difficult. It is naturally, because I said about the reasons, the composition of the Congress does not correspond then to the real social, economical structure of population in the country and real processes. But Mr. Yeltsin survived. He will make some corrections in the practical course of ruling, and government will be a little bit changed, but they still remain as the leaders of reform. And by the way, the first post-communist government normally have to be withdrawn, and we unfortunately have such kind of examples. For example, in Poland, the government of Mr. Mazowiecki; in Estonia, the government of Mr. Savisaar; in Lithuania, government of Mrs. Prunskiene, and so on. And if our government will still have an opportunity to continue the reform, I think we shall be very lucky.
So, in other words, President Yeltsin is battling uphill to survive in the face of that kind of historical precedent that you talk about.
Yes, I think so, and he's in a difficult position, but due to the supporting of the population, I think the reforms will be irreversible.
Do you think that if he is confronted with a parliament that becomes unworkable, that he would consider the last resort of dissolving that parliament?
Unfortunately, our president has not such kind of right. It was not fixed in constitution, like, for example, in French constitution and in constitutions of another countries. He cannot do it. This parliament can only dissolve it itself, like it was done with the all-union parliament half a year ago after abortive coup d'etat. But this parliament will keep their places, and the deputies had this bitter experience on their eyes, experience of all-union parliament. They will not leave the power, unfortunately, and maybe in some months we shall be enforced to organize a parallel structure or unit of power, something like constitutional meeting, persons who will be elected specially to adopt a new constitution.
So effectively to change the whole structure?
Sorry?
Effectively to change the structure?
Unfortunately, for the transitional period, we stay with the same old structures of power, and it is not efficient enough. And in fact, now we have a more promoted, more progressive, and more young in social and biological meaning government, executive power, than legislative power.
Okay.
And it is our problem.
Boris Yeltsin is also walking a tightrope over the question of Russian minorities in other republics. How explosive an issue is that potentially? What is your worst case scenario?
Yes, it is a great problem because after the breakdown of the last empire in the world, we realized that the symbolic borders between our republics, majority of them were just drafted by Stalin and Khrushchev times. They became real borders, and in several cases they are not already transparent. And it is a problem because 25 million of Russians stayed abroad of Russia and became ethnic minorities. It is very difficult for people to accustomed to realize the new positions. And the Russian state.
Yeah, but it's your position, isn't it, that you would leave Ukrainian Russians or Moldovan Russians or Georgian Russians to fend for themselves?
Russia willingly refused from the role of big brother. We willingly recognized the independence of new sovereign states, and we cannot be involved, for example, with the help of military power into inner affairs of these states. But we shall pay enough attention to the problems of our compatriots abroad. And we have 12 million of Russians in Ukraine and 5 million Ukrainians in Russia, on the other hand. And of course, we shall care about their cultural and other demands.
But you would not send troops in to protect them?
We cannot protect them by the power. We can only have the negotiation on the international level in accordance with the Helsinki Summary document and another national documents and international law. And that touch Moldova and Azerbaijan and other republics.
Mikhail Astasiev, how far should Russia go to claim back Russian minorities in republics like the Ukraine and Moldova? How far should Russia go, in your view, to protect those minorities?
I suppose the government that wants to have popularity in its population must behave like it is normal in international relations. Remember an American government, when some Americans are under danger in some Caribbean isle, you see that very often American government makes a strong position on the issue, especially in the case of former Soviet Union. It's just the point of Galina Starovoytova and Yeltsin's surroundings that the Soviet Union and Russia was the prison for nations. But I should ask you, do you saw the prison when the prisoner wants to be put into prison? Now we have messages from the Supreme Soviet of Gagauz Republic, from the Supreme Soviet of South Ossetia, from Crimea Peninsula, and they ask to be taken into Russian Federation.
Yes, but let me put this to you. Let me put this to you, because we are running out of time. If the Crimean Russians say they want to be a part of the Russian Federation, but the Ukraine will not allow them to do that, the Ukraine says Crimea is now part of the Ukraine, what would you have the Russian Federation do? Eventually use military force?
I suppose it's not needed, because the idea of being integral part of Russian or some sort of Soviet or some sort of new union is so popular that it doesn't need some military support. The population wants to be together with us. and the only power who may interfere would be Ukrainian forces, so do the aggression would came from Kiev in such case.
In which case you would expect the Russian Federation military to respond?
It is a very, very special case. You know, I suppose all this conflict might be dissolved without arms. The only thing that is needed, strong position of government. Because we have so many links with other republics, I mean economical links, military links and so on, that it is not in the interest of any republic to use military force on border problems. The only thing that I state, we must consider the interest of ordinary people.
Galina Starovoitova, what do you say in response to Mikhail Astasiev?
Unfortunately, I have to fix that it is an irresponsible position if we shall follow the advice of Mr. Astafyev and to use arm and power in relations with the Ukraine. The Yugoslavian way will be provided for us and for all the globe. And of course, we shall recognize the right for self-determination of Crimean population if they will vote for independence or for the reunification with Russia. We still don't have such kind of response, such demand from their side. And he's not quite correct in this position, but it does not mean that we shall use the troops and the troops of CIS or Russian troops. We have solved this problem by the peaceful negotiation. And especially we now feel the lack of confidence from side of Ukraine. And my friend, a member of Ukrainian parliament, Yuri Sherbak, he was a member of All Union Parliament at the same time, and he said that we both, both peoples, are like the prisoners who came out together from the same prison, but still are connected by the same chain. But if we shall destroy at all this chain, maybe we shall find that we cannot live without each other, but it is a problem of future. Of course, people voted for their independence, and they want to be free. First of all, I mean the position of Ukraine, Baltic countries, and Transcaucasus republics. And of course, when we take the problem only from the Russian point of view, through Russian glasses, we are not enough objective.
Do you acknowledge, though, that given the instability and uncertainty over the economic conditions in Russia and the other republics, the kinds of violence that have, and instability that has broken out in some of the republics over their ethnic violence, that the situation right now is really quite explosive and dangerous?
Yes, it is dangerous and explosive. I think so. It is a bad background, this economical crisis, to solve another kind of problems. I mean the transition to the multi-party system, to the real parliamentary pluralism, and the solving of the national states problems. And of course, we combine now three revolutions at all the same time. I mean the transition from empire to the new free confederation of independent states, the economical reforms, transition to market economy, and so on. And we shall try to do it in a peaceful way. We shall be very responsible and very careful, and we cannot risk by all this program if we shall care about, first of all, different kinds of ethnic minorities abroad of Russia.
Okay, and that is where we're going to have to leave it tonight because we're out of time, but thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now let's find out what's making headlines back here in Australia. The Financial Review leads with the Prime Minister's shift away from human rights in the new relationship between Australia and Indonesia. The emphasis now on political stability and economic growth. The West Australian highlights the lukewarm response from President Suharto to Paul Keating's call for a summit of Asian Pacific leaders. The Australian covers the return home of the man at the eye of the New South Wales political storm, Terry Metherell, with MPs demanding proof that his job offer was not corrupt. On that same subject, the Sydney Telegraph Mirror reprints Metherell's brief letter of application for the position in the Premier's department, released to the paper by Nick Greiner himself. The letter also appears in the Sydney Morning Herald which charts the former Liberals' very fast track into a top job, all on the same day. And the Herald Sun in Melbourne leads with the OECD figures showing Australia's tumbling standard of living. We are now ranked 13th amongst the organisation's 24 members. And reporting on the tariff story that has given opposition leader John Hewson a serious political headache is Brad Norrington from the Sydney Morning Herald's Canberra Bureau. Brad, how seriously do we read the position that John Hewson is in? Because the numbers within the national ranks are starting to mount, aren't they, in opposition to that tariff, zero tariff level?
Well, that's right, Kerry. What started off as a fairly small rebellion, if you like, within Queensland National Party ranks by 3 senators has now turned into a national debacle involving Queensland, New South Wales, Victorian and West Australia National Party figures over the issue of sugar tariffs, but more particularly an overall cut in tariff levels and why in fact they should proceed when farmers believe that they are competing on corrupted world markets.
So it's already moved beyond sugar and it's now virtually all embracing. They're now effectively saying leave tariffs generally where they are. We want the status quo for the time being.
Certainly at the level of the Queensland National Party, they are trying to confine the issue to sugar tariffs, but it has been broadened by the leaders of the National Party in the states to include overall tariff levels.
And to what extent is Tim Fischer now close to losing majority support within his own party on this?
Well, it's rather close because 8 out of 18 of the sitting federal National Party members are now seriously calling for an end to the zero tariff policy under John Hewson's fight back package. And it creates a really big rift for John Hewson and a problem for Tim Fischer's own leadership.
It was interesting, Hewson this morning came on with a very strong line about the Nationals in Queensland, saying that they no longer lived in the old days of the pork barrelling. Is it correct that Tim Fischer has not done anything today to distance himself from those comments, and what impact is that likely to have for him within his own ranks?
It makes life very difficult for Tim Fischer because obviously in John Hewson's comments he is directly attacking the National Party itself. He's attacking the psyche of the National Party, if you like. So Tim Fischer now is put in the position of having to fall behind John Hewson, which he's done so far, or go back and try and defend the Queensland National Party members who he leads.
And some of the senior national figures are even now saying that John Hewson is playing foul, and that the coalition leadership had promised at the time of the fight back package that there was scope for flexibility, that it wasn't set in cement.
That's right. That's the story that the Herald is running tomorrow, to the effect that the Nationals say that they entered and supported the fight back package on the understanding that it could be reviewed. Now they feel dudded, I suppose is the best way to describe it, because John Hewson is saying that under no circumstances will the tariff policy be reviewed.
It'll be interesting to see the fallout from that one. Brad, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thanks, Kerry.
That's all from us for tonight. Tomorrow we have a portrait of an industrial dispute, which many say is a fight to fashion the workplace of the future. I hope you can join us then, but for now, good night.
And we are quite close to the real explosion.